People use the good ones. That is the truth nobody wants to say out loud, because it sounds harsh, almost cruel. But what hurts even more is this. Many of the people who get used the most are not weak, not foolish, not naive in the simple sense. They are often the ones with the biggest hearts, the deepest empathy, the strongest desire to keep peace. And that is exactly why they become easy to reach, easy to lean on, easy to drain. The painful twist is that being good is not what destroys them. What destroys them is believing that goodness means always saying yes, always understanding, always staying soft even when life keeps teaching them that softness without limits becomes self-betrayal. A lot of people have spent years being praised for being calm, patient, available, forgiving, mature. They became the person everyone could call when things fell apart. The person who would understand. The person who would stay. The person who would not make things harder. And at first, that identity feels noble. It feels clean. It feels like strength. But over time, something dangerous begins to happen. You stop asking whether you are being kind or whether you are simply being convenient. You stop asking whether your patience is virtue or fear. You stop asking whether your silence is wisdom or just a habit built from swallowing your own pain so nobody feels uncomfortable around you. That is where many people lose themselves. Because there is a difference between being good and being available for disrespect. There is a difference between being loving and being easy to manipulate. There is a difference between peace and passivity. Stoic wisdom never asked you to become a doormat for the world. It never told you to let people take from your spirit and call it maturity. It never said that self-control means enduring endless dishonor with a smile on your face. Real discipline is not the ability to tolerate everything. Real discipline is the ability to see clearly what deserves your energy and what does not. And that clarity is uncomfortable. Because once you start seeing clearly, you realize that some people did not love your heart. They loved your access. They loved your forgiveness. They loved your willingness to stay the same while they gave less and less. They loved that you would question yourself before questioning them. They loved that you would feel guilty for setting a boundary they never felt guilty for crossing. And that realization hurts, because it forces you to admit something your heart resisted for a long time. Not everyone who stays near you is there because they value you. Some stay because you make their life easier while making your own life heavier. That is why so many good people feel tired all the time. Not physically tired only. Spiritually tired. Emotionally tired. Tired in a way sleep cannot fix. Because the exhaustion is not coming from work alone. It is coming from carrying relationships, conversations, expectations, and versions of yourself that were built to keep everyone comfortable except you. And the deeper tragedy is that many people do this so long they start calling it love. They start calling it loyalty. They start calling it humility. But sometimes it is not humility. Sometimes it is fear of disappointing others because you built your worth around being needed. That is one of the most dangerous prisons a person can live in. When your value depends on how useful you are, you will accept things you should never accept. You will keep showing up in places where your presence is appreciated, but your soul is ignored. You will keep giving explanations to people who only listen long enough to get what they want from you. You will keep shrinking your truth so others never have to face the weight of what they are doing. And after enough time, you no longer feel like a person. You feel like a function, a role, a source, a safe place for everyone else while becoming a stranger to yourself. This is why the Stoics spoke so deeply about inner authority. Not because they wanted people to become cold. Not because they believed in shutting down the heart. But because they understood that a life without inner authority becomes a life ruled by everyone else's appetite. If you do not decide what is acceptable in your life, someone else will decide for you. If you do not define your limits, the world will test you until it finds where you disappear. And if you do not learn to say no with peace, you will keep saying yes with resentment. That resentment is important. You should pay attention to it. Because resentment is often the soul's final warning before numbness. It appears when you keep giving what you no longer want to give. It appears when your mouth says yes and your spirit says enough. It appears when you try so hard to be good that you become dishonest with yourself. Many people think anger makes them bad. But sometimes anger is not evil. Sometimes it is the part of you that still remembers you deserve dignity. And dignity matters more than approval ever will. Approval is unstable. It changes with mood, convenience, and benefit. The same people who praise your kindness today may resent your boundary tomorrow. The same people who call you amazing when you give everything may call you selfish the moment you protect your peace. That is why you cannot build your identity on being liked. You cannot base your character on how comfortable other people feel when you deny yourself. If your goodness only works when it costs you your self-respect, then it is not goodness in its highest form. It is conditioning. It is survival dressed like virtue. Marcus Aurelius wrote often about acting according to nature, and part of human nature is reason. Reason asks hard questions. Reason does not only ask, "Am I being kind?" It also asks, "Is this wise? Is this just? Is this honorable? Is this aligned with truth?" A kind heart without reason becomes easy to exploit. Reason without heart becomes hard and empty. But when heart and reason stand together, something powerful happens. You stop becoming easy prey for those who mistake softness for weakness. That does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop bleeding for people who only visit you when they need something. It means you stop explaining your pain to those committed to misunderstanding it. It means you stop overextending yourself for relationships that survive only through your effort. It means you stop giving endless chances to behavior that has already shown you its nature. And yes, that change can make you look different. Some will say you changed. Some will say you became distant. Some will say you are not as sweet as before. But what they often mean is this: you are no longer as easy to use as before. That is not a loss. That is growth. If this reflection is already speaking to something real inside you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Sometimes one honest message reaches someone at the exact moment they need to stop abandoning themselves. One of the hardest things to accept is that many good people are not actually afraid of conflict. They are afraid of guilt. They can survive arguments. They can survive distance. What they struggle to survive is the internal feeling that they might have hurt someone, disappointed someone, become the bad person in somebody else's story. So they keep overgiving, over-explaining, overcompensating, just to avoid that feeling. But here is the quiet truth: if you need to betray yourself in order to be seen as good, then the image of goodness has become an idol in your life. And idols always ask for too much. Seneca warned against becoming enslaved to things outside our control, and that includes other people's opinions of us. You cannot control how someone interprets your boundary. You cannot control whether they call it selfish, dramatic, cold, or unnecessary. You can only control whether your action comes from truth or fear. That is the real battlefield. Not your reputation in the mouths of others, but your integrity in the silence of your own mind. Because at the end of the day, you know when you are acting from peace, and you know when you are acting from panic. You know when your kindness is genuine, and you know when it is desperation wearing a gentle face. You know when you are helping because you choose to, and when you are helping because you are terrified that saying no will make someone leave, judge you, or stop loving you. That kind of fear has ruined many lives quietly. Not with dramatic collapse, but with slow erosion. A little self-respect lost here. A little truth swallowed there. A little exhaustion ignored. A little disappointment normalized. Until one day, you wake up and realize you have become highly acceptable to others and barely recognizable to yourself. That is the hidden cost of being the good one in a world full of people who confuse access with entitlement. So no, the answer is not to become cruel. The answer is not to become bitter. The answer is not to punish the world because the world took too much. The answer is to become clear. Clear about what you allow. Clear about what you carry. Clear about who gets access to your time, your patience, your emotional labor, your forgiveness. A good heart is still a beautiful thing. But a good heart without discernment becomes a wound that keeps reopening. And maybe that is what you are finally starting to understand. Maybe the lesson is not that being good was a mistake. Maybe the lesson is that you were never meant to offer your goodness without wisdom. You were never meant to confuse self-erasure with love. You were never meant to keep shrinking so others could remain comfortable in patterns that were breaking you from the inside. If any part of this touched a nerve in you, write one word in the comments that describes what you felt while hearing it. Sometimes naming the truth is the first step toward living differently. The moment you begin to set boundaries, you discover something most people never tell you. Guilt often arrives before peace does. Not because your boundary is wrong, but because your nervous system has been trained to confuse self-protection with selfishness. For a long time, your instinct may have been to keep the peace at any cost, to soften every truth, to carry every burden quietly, to stay accessible even when your soul was asking for rest. So when you finally begin to pull back, when you finally begin to say no, when you finally stop explaining yourself to everyone who feels entitled to your energy, it does not feel powerful at first. It feels strange. It feels heavy. It feels almost like you are doing something wrong. That feeling is where many people turn back. They mistake discomfort for error. They think, maybe I am being too harsh. Maybe I should just let it go one more time. Maybe I am overreacting. But not every uncomfortable feeling is a warning. Some uncomfortable feelings are evidence that an old pattern is breaking. Some discomfort means you are finally doing what your spirit needed long ago. Some guilt is not moral guilt at all. It is simply the pain of becoming unfamiliar to people who benefited from your lack of limits. And that distinction changes everything. Because once you understand that, you stop worshiping guilt as if it were always truth. You begin to examine it. You begin to ask, did I actually do something wrong, or am I just no longer acting in the role everyone expected from me? That is a powerful question. A freeing question. A necessary question. Because many people live their whole lives obeying emotions they never learned to question. They feel guilty, so they assume they are guilty. They feel anxious, so they assume they are unsafe. They feel resistance, so they assume they should stop. But the Stoic mind does not bow immediately to emotion. It observes it. It studies it. It asks whether the feeling is revealing truth or simply exposing a habit. And habits can feel sacred when they have been with you a long time. Especially the habit of being emotionally available to everyone. There are people who can call you only when they are lonely. People who can disappear when you need them and reappear when they need comfort. People who expect your understanding but never offer the same depth back to you. People who unload their confusion, their chaos, their pain, their drama, and somehow leave lighter while you stay heavier. And if you have spent much of your life being the strong one, the wise one, the calm one, the one who gets it, then you may not even notice how much of your energy is being consumed until your heart begins to harden from exhaustion. That hardening does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like being tired of conversations that go nowhere. Sometimes it looks like losing patience faster than you used to. Sometimes it looks like feeling irritated by people you once wanted to help. Sometimes it looks like emotional numbness. You do not cry as easily. You do not care as deeply. You do not trust your own generosity the way you once did. And that is not because your heart became small. It is because your heart has been overused. Even something beautiful becomes fragile when it is handled without care. This is why boundaries are not walls. They are forms of respect. A wall says nobody gets in. A boundary says I decide how far in you get. A wall is built from fear alone. A boundary is built from self-knowledge. A wall isolates. A boundary clarifies. Many people avoid boundaries because they do not want to become cold, but healthy boundaries are often what make genuine warmth possible. Without them, your kindness becomes contaminated by exhaustion. Your generosity becomes mixed with resentment. Your patience becomes forced. And what once came from love begins to come from pressure. That is not sustainable. Epictetus taught that we should pay close attention to what is within our control and what is not. You cannot control whether someone respects your limit. You cannot control whether they understand your distance. You cannot control whether they suddenly call you different, selfish, arrogant, or cold. But you can control whether you abandon yourself to keep them comfortable. You can control whether you keep handing your peace to people who have done nothing to carry it with care. You can control whether you continue making your inner life available to those who only know how to consume, not protect. This is where strength becomes quiet. Real strength is not loud. It does not always announce itself. Sometimes strength is simply not answering the message that would pull you back into the same draining cycle. Sometimes strength is declining the invitation that would cost you your peace. Sometimes strength is refusing to rescue people from consequences they keep creating for themselves. Sometimes strength is allowing silence to say what endless explanations never could. And silence reveals more than most people realize. When you stop chasing, you see who notices your absence. When you stop over-explaining, you see who was never trying to understand you in the first place. When you stop offering unlimited access, you see who only loved the version of you that never required respect. Silence removes the performance. Silence removes the extra effort. Silence exposes the real structure of a relationship. And not everyone survives that exposure. That can be heartbreaking. Because part of you still wants to believe that if you love better, explain better, wait longer, forgive deeper, things will change. Part of you still wants to believe your effort can awaken someone else's conscience. But one of the hardest truths in life is this. Your goodness cannot transform someone who is comfortable benefiting from your lack of boundaries. Your loyalty cannot heal someone who only values what you provide. Your patience cannot force reciprocity from a person who has built their comfort around your overextension. The Stoics understood this in a way that still cuts deeply today. They knew that suffering often grows when expectation refuses to match reality. Not because hope is evil, but because denial is costly. If someone consistently shows you that they take more than they give, believe the pattern. If someone repeatedly crosses the line and then depends on your softness to erase the consequence, believe the pattern. If someone only reaches for you when they are empty but never shows up when you are breaking, believe the pattern. Wisdom begins when you stop negotiating with what has already been made clear. And yet, even after seeing it clearly, many people still struggle to let go. Why? Because they do not just fear losing the person. They fear losing the identity they carried inside that relationship. The helper, the fixer, the peacemaker, the one who could always be counted on, the one who stayed, the one who understood. Letting go of a draining dynamic often feels like losing a piece of yourself, because you may have built so much of your self-worth around being needed. So when you are no longer needed, or when you stop volunteering yourself to be used, you face a frightening silence. Who am I if I am not constantly saving someone? That silence is sacred. Because for the first time, your life stops revolving around proving your value through sacrifice. For the first time, you can begin to build an identity rooted not in usefulness, but in truth. Not in endless availability, but in inner steadiness. Not in being everything to everyone, but in being honest with yourself. And honesty changes a person. It makes you less easy to control, less easy to guilt, less easy to pull into emotional labor that was never yours to carry. If this is making sense to you, take a second to subscribe and leave a like. Quiet truths like this often reach people right when they are finally tired of betraying themselves. There is also something else you must understand. Not every request deserves your compassion in the same way. That may sound uncomfortable, but it is real. Compassion is not blind access. Compassion is not endless accommodation. Compassion without discernment can become self-neglect in noble clothing. Some people are not asking for support. They are asking for permission to keep using your stability as a place to collapse without ever building their own. And if you keep confusing rescue with love, You will spend years pouring into people who have no intention of learning how to stand. That is not kindness. That is misdirected devotion. A disciplined soul learns to ask, is my presence helping, or is it enabling? Is my support creating growth, or just creating dependence? Am I acting from wisdom, or from the fear of being seen as uncaring? These are not cold questions. They are clean questions. They protect both your peace and your integrity, because the goal is not to become less loving. The goal is to become loving without becoming available for misuse. And yes, some people will not like the new you. They will miss the version of you that answered immediately, forgave instantly, gave endlessly, and asked for almost nothing. They will miss the version of you that carried the emotional weight of the relationship for both sides. They will miss the version of you that made their behavior easier to maintain. But missing your lack of boundaries is not the same as missing you. And that is a truth many people need to sit with longer. Read that again in your spirit. Missing your access is not the same as valuing your soul. Missing your usefulness is not the same as loving your presence. Missing the comfort you provided is not the same as respecting who you are. Once you understand that, you stop being seduced by every return, every apology, every sudden burst of attention that appears the moment you pull away. Not all returns are sincere. Some are simply reactions to lost control. This is where patience with yourself matters. Because changing these patterns does not happen in one day. There will be moments where you set a boundary and immediately want to take it back. There will be nights where you question yourself. There will be mornings where guilt tries to dress itself as morality. There will be moments where loneliness tempts you to reopen doors that nearly destroyed your peace. But growth is not proven by never feeling weak. Growth is proven by what you choose when weakness whispers to you. So choose slowly. Choose clearly. Choose in a way your future self will not have to recover from. You do not need to become hard to stop being used. You do not need to become cruel to stop being consumed. You do not need to lose your heart to protect it. You only need to stop offering it without wisdom. That is the shift. That is the lesson. That is where peace begins. And peace rarely begins with everyone understanding you. It usually begins with you finally understanding yourself. If any line in this part felt uncomfortably true, write in the comments, I choose peace. Sometimes the first act of strength is saying the truth where your old self would have stayed silent. At some point, you have to stop asking whether people will understand your change and start asking whether your soul can survive without it. That is the real turning point. Not when the world applauds your growth. Not when everyone suddenly respects your boundaries. Not when the people who drained you finally admit what they were doing. That moment may never come. The real turning point is quieter than that. It happens when you finally get tired of calling self-betrayal kindness. It happens when you finally see that constantly being the good one was not always making you noble. Sometimes it was only making you available. Available to guilt. Available to manipulation. Available to emotional exhaustion. Available to people who knew exactly how far they could go because you kept teaching them that your limits were flexible whenever they pushed hard enough. And that is where your life begins to change. Because once you see that clearly, you cannot unsee it. You begin to notice how often your pain started with one small betrayal of yourself. One forced yes. One silenced truth. One excuse made for behavior you knew was wrong. One more chance given, not because wisdom asked for it, but because fear did. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being judged. Fear of losing connection. Fear of not being seen as loving anymore. But there is a truth stronger than that fear. Love that requires your self-erasure is not love in its healthiest form. Connection that survives only through your overextension is not peace. Acceptance that depends on your silence is not respect. And being seen as good means very little if, behind that image, you are slowly disappearing. That disappearance happens quietly. It happens when you laugh at what hurt you just to keep the mood light. It happens when you say, "It's fine," while your inner world is tightening. It happens when you keep tolerating little things because you are afraid of looking dramatic. It happens when you learn to betray your own instincts before anyone else gets the chance to reject you. That is how many people lose their center. Not through one great collapse, but through the repetition of small abandonments. That is why the recovery must also be quiet, honest, and repeated. You recover every time you tell the truth faster than you used to. You recover every time you notice guilt but do not kneel before it automatically. You recover every time you let someone be disappointed in you instead of making yourself miserable just to keep their image of you intact. You recover every time you choose clarity over approval. You recover every time you remember that your peace is not a prize for everyone who knows how to ask for it. This kind of growth does not make you less human. It makes you more whole. And wholeness feels different from people-pleasing. People-pleasing is anxious. It is always watching the room. It is always adjusting, always predicting, always trying to stay lovable, acceptable, useful. But wholeness is steady. It listens inward before it reacts outward. It does not rush to rescue every broken dynamic. It does not panic every time someone becomes uncomfortable. It does not confuse someone else's disappointment with personal failure. That calmness is powerful. Marcus Aurelius understood something many people still struggle to accept. Your mind becomes disturbed not only by events, but by your judgment of them. And one of the harshest judgments many people carry is this belief that saying no makes them bad, that stepping back makes them cold, that protecting themselves makes them selfish. But what if the deeper selfishness is expecting a person to bleed endlessly just because they have a gentle heart? What if the real disorder is not your boundary, but the world's entitlement to your softness? When you begin to see it that way, your guilt starts losing its authority. You still feel it sometimes, yes. But you stop obeying it blindly. You stop letting it drive every decision. You begin to understand that some forms of peace can only be reached by disappointing the version of you that was trained to abandon itself for applause. And that is not failure. That is maturity. That is emotional discipline. That is what happens when kindness grows up and finally learns to protect itself. Because kindness should be protected. Not hidden. Not destroyed. Protected. The world does not need more cruelty pretending to be strength. It does not need more numbness pretending to be wisdom. It does not need more bitterness pretending to be independence. But it also does not need good-hearted people teaching others that love comes with unlimited access. The answer is not to harden your soul. The answer is to refine it. To become someone who can remain compassionate without becoming consumable. Someone who can remain open without becoming exposed to everything. Someone who can remain generous without becoming emotionally homeless. That is a different kind of power. And many people will not understand it right away because they are used to a version of strength that performs. They think power is loud, aggressive, intimidating, untouchable. But sometimes the deepest power is simply this: no longer needing to prove your goodness by how much pain you can quietly endure. No longer needing to win your worth through sacrifice. No longer needing everyone to approve of your boundaries before you honor them. That kind of power is inward first. Seneca reminded us that the person who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than necessary. Think about how much of your life may have been shaped by anticipated guilt, anticipated rejection, anticipated conflict. Think about how often you exhausted yourself trying to prevent reactions that were never yours to control in the first place. How much peace have you postponed trying to manage how others would feel about your honesty? How much truth have you delayed because you wanted the message to land gently enough that nobody could accuse you of being too much? But truth does not become false just because someone dislikes hearing it. And self-respect does not become cruelty just because someone lost access to the version of you that had none. This is where many people finally breathe for real. Not because life suddenly becomes easy. Not because every relationship becomes balanced overnight. but because they stop living with their soul clenched all the time. They stop waking up already tired from carrying emotional responsibilities that never belong to them. They stop confusing overextension with virtue. They stop interpreting every inner warning as a sign to endure more. And slowly, they start meeting themselves again. That reunion matters. Because beneath the guilt, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the habit of being available to everyone, there is still a self in you that knows what peace feels like. There is still a part of you that remembers honesty. A part that remembers dignity. A part that does not want revenge, does not want drama, does not want to become cold. It simply wants to live without constantly paying for love with pieces of itself. Listen to that part more often. It will not always sound dramatic. Sometimes it sounds like a whisper saying, "Enough." Sometimes it sounds like silence instead of another explanation. Sometimes it sounds like rest. Sometimes it sounds like distance. Sometimes it sounds like not going back this time. Sometimes it sounds like refusing to carry what keeps breaking you. That voice is not the enemy of your kindness. It is the guardian of it. And once you begin to honor that voice, something beautiful happens. You stop seeing boundaries as punishments and start seeing them as alignment. You stop seeing peace as passivity and start seeing it as discipline. You stop seeing self-respect as ego and start seeing it as emotional truth. You stop trying to be the good one in everyone else's eyes and start trying to be real in your own. And that shift changes everything, because the need to be admired is exhausting, but the choice to be aligned is freeing. You do not need to become less loving. You need to become less willing to love in ways that destroy you. You do not need to become unreachable. You need to become intentional. You do not need to prove that you have a good heart. A good heart is best proven by how honestly it lives, not by how much mistreatment it tolerates. So let people misunderstand you if they must. Let them tell old stories about the version of you that was easier to access. Let them be confused by your silence, your calm, your refusal to keep performing endless patience for patterns that have already shown their nature. Not every misunderstanding needs correction. Not every opinion deserves your defense. Sometimes the most peaceful thing you can do is let people meet the consequences of no longer having unlimited access to you. That is not revenge. That is order. That is the natural correction that comes when a person finally stops volunteering their spirit to chaos. If this reflection stayed with you until here, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. And if you want, write in the comments the word boundary if you are done confusing kindness with self-abandonment. Sometimes one word is enough to mark the moment you decided not to go back to who you were. And now, let this truth settle quietly inside you. You were never meant to become hard just because the world was careless with your softness. You were never meant to become bitter just because some people only valued your usefulness. You were never meant to spend your life proving that you are good by accepting what harms you. The deeper lesson was never to stop being kind. The deeper lesson was to stop offering your kindness without wisdom. Because maybe the real strength you have been searching for is not in becoming feared, louder, colder, or more distant. Maybe the real strength is in becoming clear. Clear about what you allow. Clear about what you carry. Clear about what you owe. Clear about what is no longer yours to fix. Clear about the difference between love and access. Clear about the difference between peace and silence. Clear about the difference between patience and self-betrayal. And once that clarity arrives, life becomes quieter inside. Not perfect. Not painless. But quieter. And in that quiet, you begin to understand something the world rarely teaches well. Maybe the greatest form of self-control is not controlling everyone around you, not controlling every outcome, not controlling how others see you, but controlling the moment you finally choose to stop abandoning yourself. That is where peace begins. And that is where you begin again.